or money order for $5.95 for every book page holder you need. This is a limited time offer, so order now. That number again is 682-8496, 682-8496.
BCTV. Our best show.
Good morning. Today is the return of Svend Robinson, NDP MP for Burnaby, who has been in the centre of a somewhat national toil and tribulation and crisis over the federal NDP caucus's policy on prostitution and how to deal with a particular difficult situation in the city of Vancouver. And since then, Mr. Robinson has been changed from justice critic to corporate and consumer affairs critic. But I want you to remember what he said the last time he was on. I've got to congratulate you. You're the first MP I've ever met who's put his career in Vancouver right on the line by advocating whorehouses in the red light district. And I congratulate you for your frankness and your straightforwardness, even although I had to squeeze it out of you.
Fair enough.
It was what I said, and what he agreed with is fair enough. At that time, however, the reaction was very much in favor of Robinson and against Webster, who had the abominable bad manners to turn his back on Svend because he, Webster, was flabbergasted. But here is a fair selection of some of the reaction we got. If I'd been Svend, I'd have walked out of your studio. You, Webster, abused your position shamefully. Thank you, Webster, for your sound stand on morality and prostitution. The silent majority agrees with you, that's Webster. Here this morning is Svend Robinson. And we shall have a quiet little, not an inquisition, a quiet little inquest on what happened before and what's going to happen now. Now, by happenstance, I assure you, although I did have a crew in Amsterdam, we looked at a real red light district in the city of Amsterdam. If I have time this morning, I will play a short, sharp program on how a real red light district operates in a big metropolitan center. Here's what the tourist lady told us.
A lot of tourists are going there. All buses full. Yeah. It is here and it belongs to Amsterdam, and well, Japanese, American, everybody's going there to have a look.
Also this morning, I'm going to deal with the tip of a very major iceberg involving renegotiation of wages in shake and shingle mills and the entire IWA industry, which is in very shaky position at the moment. The other day, you'll remember the story about the two mills at Mission. Green River, which was a union mill, right? Scott Cedar Products, which was forced to become a union mill by the Labour Board.
This is not the time or the place for a union or a union hassle or for men to be out of work. It's that simple. And if the Labour Board and the union or anybody else involved that cares whether or not the economy gets rolling again, they'll put us back to work.
At the present rate we were going, I would have made over $40,000 this year, but now since we're off work, it doesn't look like we'll make that now.
These mills were closed down last Wednesday. 150 or so men out of work and 3 mills actually involved. Here this morning to tell me their problems, first of all, Mr. Scott Clarke, the owner of Green River Shake and Shingle Mill, and his son Scott, who runs the Scott Cedar Shake and Shingle Mill, in which his father, Fred, is a partner only. Just to add a little international interest to the program this morning, we have here too Mr. Stephen Dachi, who is the director of U.S. Information Agency covering Latin America and the Caribbean. And we're going to put to him some questions about Reagan's foreign policy and what the devil is happening in these seemingly miserable Central American republics. But first, Svend Robinson after the break. It would seem that the latest Robinson-Webster debate on that perennial problem of what to do about prostitutes on the streets and what to do about prostitution law set a cat among the pigeons, did it not, Mr. Robinson? Now, who was to blame for that? Was it you? Was it me? Or have you been made a scapegoat by your colleagues in the House of Commons who refuse to recognize the reality of their position on prostitution?
Look, I don't think it would be profitable for us to go back over the history of the thing and try to assign blame for what has happened, Jack. That's for other people to do. I took a position on your program on December 6th, which I felt reflected the policy of the New Democratic Party. In retrospect and in looking at the tapes again, I should have emphasized more the fact that we believe very strongly that prostitution and soliciting is degrading, is exploitive, and most importantly, I should have emphasized the distinction, the fundamental distinction, which you, I think, have glossed over, and the fundamental distinction between decriminalization and legalization. I don't believe that the state or the government should be taking any action whatsoever to formally recognize this, but where we have a fundamental difference of opinion, Jack, is you on the one hand say, look, the answer to the problem is to find them, throw them into Ocala 2 or 3 times, and that'll clean up the streets. I think that's a fair assessment of what you've said.
Just as fair as my assessment of your policy of red light districts, official whorehouses by repealing the body house section of the criminal code.
No, not quite.
But
not
first
official
of all,
whorehouse.
I don't think anyone needs to assess blame on what happened in the last interview. I didn't complain. Rose said my conduct was abominable. You said it was more of an inquisition than an interview, which you're perfectly entitled to think. Now, you have since lost your position as justice critic in the caucus. Why?
That's not for me to answer. That's for the leader of the party to answer. It's his decision as to who is justice critic, and I, of course, made no pretense of not being disappointed. I was disappointed, certainly. I think I'd been doing a good job as justice critic, but on the other hand, I'm looking forward to my new responsibilities in the economic area of consumer and corporate affairs, and I'm continuing on the Justice Committee as critic of our good friend Bob Kaplan.
Well, don't let's gloss over the basic issue on which you got into some trouble. The fact remained was that you accused me in effect of misquoting you, and I did not.
No,
My position doesn't matter. You're the MP at $67,000 a year, not me. Mm-hmm. Now, did I in fact misrepresent your position?
On subsequent programs, only, Jack, to the extent that you've suggested that I support legalization of prostitution.
Now, I know well what happened.
I think you know the difference between the two.
Well, just for the benefit of members of the public who might not appreciate all the infighting, the first thing I did was phone Broadbent's office. Mm-hmm. I wanted Broadbent to clarify, as properly I should. Broadbent ducked, ran for cover. He later ran for cover again. Mark Rose spelled out to me a policy which, although they had condemned prostitution or institutions or degradation of women, which I can understand, he spelled out a policy which I want you to spell out for me now, 1, 2, 3, so that I am not misrepresenting. You must know the policy.
I know
Tell
the
me.
Policy. Okay, our policy, Jack, is this with respect to soliciting and body house laws. First of all, decriminalize soliciting. Take it out of the criminal code.
And leave it for a bylaw.
Leave it up to local municipalities to deal with.
Okay, that's clear.
That's
Next
the
one.
The second element is repeal body house laws. Okay? Now, this is the one where there's been a lot of confusion, and I say with respect, Jack, that your definition of a body house is not, in fact, what is accurate. Okay? A body house is not just in law as it stands now a place where prostitution takes place on more than one occasion, as you've suggested.
That's correct.
As well, the definition of a body house refers to some vague acts of indecency. And when I said your home could be a body house, I wasn't suggesting that Jack's home could be a body house.
Let's go through that
No,
again.
but what I'm explaining. What I'm explaining is that law is so vague and so archaic that it does not just refer to acts of prostitution, it refers to acts of indecency in the privacy, in a private situation, and that law has to be repealed. Point number 2.
When you repeal it, what do you replace it with? Nothing?
Well, no, if you replaced it with nothing, that would mean you could have body houses on every street in the city, and I don't think anyone wants that.
You want municipal bylaws to locate the body houses in Vancouver?
Not to locate the body houses, but to say where they cannot be located. I don't want a system of licensing and so on, but I do want a system, Jack, which deals with the very serious problems that we're facing now, and I believe that if we adopted the repeal of body house laws and decriminalization of soliciting, it would have three very positive effects.
But before you
First
do
of
that,
all, well, just
I'll let you say
yeah,
that.
okay.
All right, give me the three positive
Okay,
effects.
there are at least three positive effects. First of all, it would reduce the dependence of the prostitute on her pimp. Okay, that's the first point.
Fewer pimps.
Fewer pimps. And also, I think, probably reduce the possibility of organized crime getting involved.
Less organized crime.
Secondly, it would, secondly, it would deal with what is the most serious problem, and that is the problem of kids on the street. What we've got to do is recognize that that's the most serious problem and throw the book at the customers, not attack the kids. And the third and final point, and I think this is an important point, is that it would recognize the fact we're not going to ever get rid of prostitution, but what we have to do is deal with the important economic and social factors. There are women on the street.
Yeah, well, don't give me the
no,
grassroots
just
stuff, please.
There are women on the street today who are there because the so-called Gracie's girls, because they cannot survive on their own.
That is a cheap crack because of Gracie's girls. Are you suggesting that McCarthy created the prostitute problem in the streets of Vancouver?
No. What I am saying...
That was a cheap crack.
What I am
I
saying...
won't even let you say that about a social credit cabinet minister, because what I'm going to say to you now, and I insist, Svend, on a clearly lucid, all MPs tend to give double talk. Talk about grassroots, what I really mean is this and that and the next thing. Now, correct me if I am wrong. One, take away the laws, the federal laws, which could affect street soliciting. That's point one.
We say it doesn't belong in the criminal code.
Okay. Point two, make bawdy houses not illegal.
That is correct.
Three, let the local authorities license the location of bawdy houses.
Not license the location of bawdy houses.
Zone for them.
Zoning bylaws would establish where they could not be located. We would get them out of residential communities.
With all respect in the world, I respect your position. You're even fairly clear this morning, but your colleague's position is entire, total double talk. Would you agree with me on that?
Look, I can't speak for my colleague's position. All I am trying to do, Jack, is be as clear as possible with respect to the policy of this party as adopted in convention and affirmed by me as justice critic at the Justice Committee.
Therein lies the problem. The policy is adopted with a non-debated resolution at convention and the political delicacies of the federal NDP caucus. That's where the trouble lies.
Well, look, you know, the other point...
Don't have to comment
No,
on that.
I mean, the other point that I do want to make another comment, Jack, and it's one that I think a number of people have, a question a number of people have been asking themselves, and that is, why on earth is it, and I say this again with the humblest of respect, why on earth is it that Jack Webster and Harvey Oberfeld and BCTV are spending so much time on this question at a time when hopefully they should be dealing with other important questions. Instead of Harvey Oberfeld chasing Svend Robinson, instead of Harvey Oberfeld chasing Svend Robinson down the hallways of Parliament, why isn't he chasing the Minister of Finance down the hallways of Parliament, asking him why he's cutting pensions of retired public servants?
That is the cheapest type of
pensions.
politician's diversion, Mr. Robinson, with the most humblest deference I can show you. I decide what I'm putting on my program. I regard this as a matter of major social note in the city of Vancouver. And whether you like it or not, I shall deal with it. I shall also deal on separate occasions with the grassroots problems and the economy. And we in BCTV make no apologies for our assessment or for my assessment of their assessment of prostitution problems. Now, one final question. Is there not considerable heat to repeal the bawdy house laws because of the admittedly brutal methods used by Metro Toronto police to raid male homosexual brothels in that city?
Absolutely. There's no doubt that that the abuse of bawdy house laws with respect to...
I mean, the point is that the police will raid a bawdy house by saying, "Hello, madam," but they seem to go into male homosexual brothels with baseball bats.
That's
right?
correct.
More with Svend Robinson after the break. Now I'll give you your pound of flesh. I know you're not happy at becoming corporate and consumer affairs critic. You're also still critic for the Solicitor General's Department.
I am, Jack.
Right? Okay, you won the battle on CPR.
Yes.
What was the battle you won on CPR?
Well, CPR and a number of other major charterers have been, in effect, and I use the words advisedly, ripping off consumers for a number of years by keeping more than the amount they should have kept when people canceled their flights. And what I argued was that they were in breach of regulations. I went after them on it, and I'm pleased to report, and you, Jack, you'll remember the interview with Ian Gray. I'm pleased to report that, to the best of my knowledge, they have changed their practice, and consumers can benefit from that.
Okay, I want to get reaction on this. Go ahead directly to myself or Svend Robinson. No niceties this morning. Say what you think. Go ahead, please. That's you.
Yeah?
Speak up, ma'am.
Hello?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, I was just, you know, I think Sven's really, really right.
Fair enough.
Well, you're from the old country, aren't you?
No, madam.
You're an immigrant?
Yes, madam.
All right. In the old country during the war, our daughters were allowed...
Don't tell me what your daughters did in the old country during the war. Go ahead, please, on the next call.
Jack?
That's me, yes.
Oh, I still think, in spite of all your sanctimonious indignation, Svend is one of the best in his field. Till recently, you haven't been so bad earning your top salary.
Thank you very much.
It must be really hard up for a listening public to expose the weakness of the NDP party.
Thank you, ma'am. 2-0 for Svend. Go ahead, please.
Yes, I'd like to commend Svend.
3-0 for Svend. Go ahead,
Not
please.
even let him finish. Gee.
I want to get as many as I can. Go ahead, please. I want to make you look good.
That's nice of you, Jack.
Go ahead, please.
Hello?
That's you.
Yeah, since a pimp-prostitute relationship is in point of fact psychologically a dominant master and masochist servile slavery relationship, how can decriminalization get rid of the pimp? And look, Robinson, Jack never bullied you. Your strike one was the time that you advocated conjugal visiting rights for gay inmates of our prison systems. Strike two was when you chose to break instead of helping to improve our existing laws that you don't like, when you harbored in your apartment a fugitive from the Canada Immigration Authority.
Okay, that's enough for that. He's against you on 2 counts.
Fair enough. Yep.
Go ahead, please. I think that's the same guy. Go ahead, please.
Mr. Jack.
Yeah.
Yeah, how are you doing?
Not bad. Go ahead.
Yes, sir. I agree with Mr. Robinson to the point where he says if you legalize the prostitutionals and the brothels and get it off the streets, you would get rid of the children involved, and also by having the girls working under their governed properly, and have the girls go for doctor's appointments and stuff this year, you would probably cut down on the disease problem.
Thank you, sir. What do you think of that? Is that not an extrapolation of your position?
That may be an extrapolation of the position, but I think that the gentleman has made a good point, Jack.
Good. Go ahead, please.
Legalizing houses or zones solves nothing. It only creates another class of prostitution.
Okay.
You know, the best will still be like the bar girls. Then the middle class would be in the houses or in the zones. And when they get worn out, you know, you can't shoot them like old horses. Then they hit the streets.
No giggling on the set, please. This is not a funny topic this morning.
It's not a funny topic, but... Hello?
Yes, carry on.
It's not a funny topic. I spent a lot of time in a country in 57, 58 where they had legalized prostitution. It was houses. And I can't name the country because that would lead to problems.
Why would it lead to problems?
You still had the bars.
Okay, I think we've got your message. Here's a guy who's against
But, Jack, there is a point, though, that I want to make, and that is that in your solution, in the Webster solution, there's a double standard, because Jack has never talked about the customer. And I get back to the Wendy King situation, where Wendy King had the book thrown at her for keeping calm body house, but all of the customers that she had, and I think one of them was a rather illustrious former judge, all the customers that she had went scot-free. So in the Webster solution, throw them in jail, put them in Ocala. There's a double standard. You don't deal with the customers, and I don't think that's right.
I see no reason why the customers should not be dealt with. But let me give you some of the facts of life in Vancouver right now. There have been 600 people, 600, picked up under this weak municipal bylaw, correct? There have about half of the fines have been paid by those found-ins or those customers of the ladies. There has, as far as we know, most of the women have not paid their fines. To implement the fine in the present weak and stupid bylaw in Vancouver, the girl has to be taken to small debt court and examined for the seizure of any property she has.
I'm not arguing.
Stupid. Not one girl that I know of has been taken to court yet to pay a fine.
I'm not arguing that the present system is satisfactory for the people in the West End, Jack. What I'm saying is there are two alternatives. There's the Webster alternative of throwing the girls, as you put it, in jail, and there's my alternative, which is to decriminalize and to recognize that we're not going to get rid of the problem, and hopefully we'll get rid of a lot of the factors surrounding it. And most importantly, and I think there should be perhaps a program on this, we'll start to recognize that many of the prostitutes that are down there have themselves been the victims of serious abuse and violence. Whether
Always have been. And let me give you some of the facts of life.
Yeah.
The Webster solution, as you call it so glibly, is the old criminal code double standard. It allows a policeman to arrest a prostitute. And many times when she's been arrested, that has protected her from a fate much worse than death. She is fined, she goes to jail eventually after 2 or 3 franchise fine payments, gets treated, examined, and comes out again, and after 4 or 5 times often disappears from the street. That was the old system.
Yes, that's right, and it appears that that's what you want to go back to, and I don't think that's acceptable.
I don't think we are yet ready for legalized prostitution of any kind.
Not legalized, decriminalized.
Well, that's the same thing.
That's not.
You and I will argue technicalities, but I never know the difference between legalizing and decriminalizing. Go ahead from Powell River.
Yes, I'm not really condoning prostitution at all, but we would have to ask if
Go on.
we have to ask if society is persecuting these prostitutes in the order that they have to deal with pimps and disease and crime.
True.
And why can't we have a red light district or a town that would provide daycare and schooling and health facilities for these people?
There's some other victims of this, and I think we have to remember that as well. They're not talked about often, but that's the children of these prostitutes, the dependents of these prostitutes, and it's not a very pleasant life. I'll tell you something I wasn't going to raise, but I will raise it. I've had some experience on the street in terms of cab driving. I used to drive for Joe Filipponi. Remember Joe Filipponi?
Careful what you say now. I don't want any lawsuits.
No, there's no lawsuits, but I'm just telling you that, I have in the past, when I put myself through law school, I've driven cab for Joe, the old diamond cabs. You remember them well, I'm sure.
What does this lead to?
What this is leading to is the fact that I have seen, and I've talked personally to many of the women down there, and I think it would be fundamentally wrong for us to make them the scapegoats of a system which basically treats sex as a commodity.
Get Joe Filipponi off the hook. Are you making any allegations or imputations or innuendo against Joe Filipponi?
No, of course not.
Merritt. No. Go ahead from Merritt.
Hello, Jack.
Yes.
Were you ever in the Navy?
I was in the Army.
Oh. Well, a couple of weeks ago you talked to Mr. Robinson and you very naughtily turned your back to him while you were talking to him.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought it was very uncouth.
Okay, I was very uncouth. I was flabbergasted, that's why, Sven. Next for Terrace, of all places. 1244. Go ahead from Terrace.
Good morning, Jack.
Morning.
You may be of interest, and maybe you're being a little harsh on Svend, but the Terrace Council went on record on January the 5th, 1983, as strongly opposing the recent policy of setting up a specified area bylaws for the purpose of establishing red light districts in body houses. The recorded vote, it was 4-3, and the 3 votes against that motion were the mayor and 2 of the aldermen of one who is the president of the New Democratic Party up here. And when they were asked about it, the opposing people, they thought it was a frivolous and petulant motion. And I guess maybe Mr. Robinson does have some support, but I don't believe the people on Terrace support it.
Thank you. Michael Harcourt, as you saw on the tapes this morning, of course, was not in favor of yours.
No.
Davy Barrett gave your proposition on the federal NDP caucus the back of his hand.
I recognize that. I recognize Mike doesn't support it. And I also recognize, as this gentleman has quite properly pointed out, that for heaven's sake, Jack, let's get on to other issues. I think that's very important. It's an important issue, but let's get on to other issues. Let's not flog it eternally.
Oh, no, of course not. But I didn't say it was an inquisition. You did.
I've never had my back turned on me before by an interviewer, and I guess that surprised me just a little bit.
I was absolutely flabbergasted. Totally flabbergasted. My thanks to Sven Robinson. Next, a real red light district in Amsterdam. Last week we had Bob Wilson, one of our producers, and Don Timbrell and a sound man in Amsterdam doing something else. I asked them to take a quick look at the official red light district in the city of Amsterdam. During the course of this, they meet a couple of charming and very well-informed police officers. Here's the report from Amsterdam.
Prostitution in Amsterdam is legal. It is controlled. Would you comment on that?
No, yeah, it's prostitution is illegal.
It is illegal.
Illegal. Yeah. It's not allowed. By law, it's not allowed. But during the ages, we have the prostitutes in this town. It's been a harbor for ages. And there are some rules were made between the Department of Justice, the administration of the town, and the bosses of the police. And there are some rules which controls the matter.
You've got approximately 4,000 prostitutes in Amsterdam.
That's true.
You have a form of registration. Can you explain that?
When they start, they have to report themselves, and they give their names, they make pictures, and they register it on the town hall and the police, main police office. Also, they have to report themselves by a doctor.
Yeah, I suppose once a month.
To control them medical, and they have to come back every month. You said we got 4,000 prostitutes, it's true. From the 4,000, we got 2,000 registered. And the other 2,000, they're working all over the town, in a lot of streets and areas, in clubs, working on shows and on the streets. And that's very difficult. And that's the part we got trouble with.
In the red light district, it's allowed if they're staying behind the windows, if they're dressed proper, not walking in the street. But the border gives the girls who are walking in the street, they waving at cars who are walking by, but they're walking from the morning till late in the night, So all day, all night, there are a lot of cars driving through the street, a lot of men walking through the street, making a lot of noise. So the people are living in the street. They don't come to a normal sleeping time. Normal families, like your family, I suppose, doesn't live in this part of town. All the people, just like my colleague said, are making a living there. So they're working at night and sleeping in the daytime. So nobody has any bother.
And they're very old families. They know each other very well. They control the city themselves. That's the reason we didn't got a lot of trouble with them.
Yeah. The only trouble we got is when a customer comes complaining at the police station. He says, I agreed 50 guilders, and they took 200 guilders from me. Or a girl is coming, I have a customer, and he paid for it twice, and he can't do the second time. And now he has to leave. He's been there for an hour, so I have to do another customer. That's our.
It's a very hard business. They're nice girls, but they're very hard.
Yeah, time is money.
Yeah.
If you had a choice, as a constable, you'd prefer to work that area, would you?
Yeah, I suppose it's better. That's a part of town where it's a little bit legal, so you can control it. If you say it's illegal, they're doing it all over town, and you can control it. It's better 1 square kilometer in the town where you can control it, then it's all over town. They're all addicts to the use of heroin, and they need about 300, 400 kilos a day. So they need a lot of customers each day, because they're asking 25, 20 kilos each customer.
They're all youngsters, 12, 13, 14 years old.
Yeah.
That's a problem. It's a very big problem, but it is very hard to control. Most of the girls, they not came from Holland, but they came from Scandinavia and Germany and Switzerland, Italy.
Yeah. And they don't go to the doctor, so all the girls got the most terrible diseases, and they spread over town.
Relationship that you have with the pimp, the prostitute's boss, is there a name for that person?
Yeah, you call it pooier or souteneur in Dutch.
And what is your relationship as a police officer with that individual?
Armed peace, eh? He's the police of the prostitutes. Huh? Their own police.
He controlled his own small world. And what's happened inside, it's very difficult for us to see. Most of the girls, when they're in trouble with the pimp, they didn't come to the police. It all control themselves. And to find...
They get beaten up, but they don't go to the police. It's a very closed community.
And most of the girls, they like to work alone for themselves. There are girls, they do, but it is very difficult. The rooms they rent, they are very expensive. They need somebody to bring them in. It costs them 100, 200 guilders a day to rent a room to work in. And then you need some people. You know some people, otherwise you didn't can work here.
When is it illegal? The window that the prostitute is in the red light district, can she go outside that area?
No, she must stay in her room behind her window. Eh? If she's walking in the street and making a bar, you can pick her up and she get a penalty from about 250 guilders. And if she's picked up several times, she goes to jail for a few weeks. So in that way you control it. If you pick her up for the third time when she's playing the prostitute walking in the street and you pick her up, she goes to jail. So by that way you can control it.
A quick summary of the situation in Amsterdam is as follows. There is 1 square kilometre of the red light district. It is not legal, but it is tolerated. There are 2,000 prostitutes in the red light district who must stay behind their window, which they rent. The pimps are the policemen in the red light district. And in Amsterdam, they have the same problem as we have had for years, but they have it in spades. They've got about 2,000 freelance prostitutes, some of whom the policemen tell us are 12, 13, and 14 and come from other countries. And if a girl is soliciting on the streets, she is, like it used to be under the criminal code here, picked up, charged with soliciting, and after 2 or 3 fines, she goes to jail. That's all I wanted to give you was the score in Amsterdam. Next, we're going to deal with the tip of a very big iceberg in the economy of British Columbia. The closure of a couple of shingle and shake mills in the Fraser Valley and why they closed from the point of view of Scott Clarke and his father Fred Clarke of the 2 mills I was telling you about earlier, after the break. This is a tip of a very important economic iceberg in British Columbia. I am reliably informed that every union shake and shingle mill in the Fraser Valley closed down on January the 1st this year, save and except 2 or 3. And 3 of them were closed last Wednesday because of a very complex union problem which a lot of the workers in these particular mills do not want, do not understand, and would like not to have to accept. Now with me is Fred Clarke, who is the owner of Green River Shake and Shingle Mill. Let me call it that.
That's right. Okay, Jack.
And he is also a partner, but not the controlling owner, in another one called Scott Cedar Shake and Shingle Mill.
Exactly.
Now, see if you can understand this. The first mill I mentioned, Green River, was a union mill and it began in 1971. It's always been under the IWA contract, right? Mr. Clarke Sr. and a partner opened another mill in 1981 on adjoining property. It was non-union. The IWA tried to organize it and failed. After many complications, the IWA went to the Labour Board and said, hey, we can't have a union mill and a non-union mill. The Labour Board, without a vote of the non-union fellows, put them all under the one blanket certification of the union mill. Because of that, and other complications we'll tell you about, Mr. Clarke closed these mills and threw 150 people out of work last Wednesday. Is that basically the basic facts?
That's the facts.
All right, now. First of all, tell me about the closure of Shingle mills in the Fraser Valley and why this came about so suddenly in January.
Well, it hasn't been sudden, Jack. It's been over the last 2 or 3 years. We've been in a depression in the shake and shingle industry it's been at least 3 years. And all my colleagues they're at wit's ends. They don't know what to do.
But give me the specific reason about the California market.
Well, we've been hit with a series of fires in Southern California, and there's been a panic down there. And I don't think it really has anything to do with the shake roofs, but that's the scapegoat in Southern California. And consequently, we've lost approximately 40 to 45% of our markets. And in the depression or economic chaos that we've been in the last 3 years, our industry is a disaster.
If you want to export to California now, do you have to make these shakes fire resistant?
In most places in Southern California, that's true.
So you started off with this big slash in the market from Southern California.
Exactly.
And the economic situation.
Now,
but you tell me why you closed not just one, not just two, but 3 mills last Wednesday. Now, you give me your version of it so I can try and understand it.
Well, last Wednesday, I had an agreement verbally sanctioned by the IWA Local 1367 in Haney. They were quite aware of the agreement that I had with my crew. And I was under that agreement from October 1st to December 31st. Okay. December 22nd or thereabouts, my crew came to me and says, well, what are we going to do? I says, the market hasn't improved. We're in really tough economic times. I says, I don't know what to do. I asked, so give us a little more cut. And he said, well, no, we can't do that. But they said to me that we will go under the same basis that we've gone under the last 3 months, which is namely $2.68 a square for Cuban shake and packing, rather than the $3.03 rate.
In other words, last October, you renegotiated with the IWA the rates for piecework in your union shingle mill.
No. I negotiated the rate, a revision rate, with my crew and the shop committee. They took it down to the local 1367, who said, well, hold it, we can't sign that. That's in contrary to the master agreement. So they says, but we're going to overlook this. We won't enforce it. You guys go back to work. We're not going to do anything about it. This is verbally committed by them. So that's fine. We went back to work. No problem. Everybody happy, making a living, and a good one, I might add, Jack. As you may be aware of, the highest paid segment of the forestry industry is in the shake and shingle business. I have men that make anywhere up to $200-300 a day. Matter of fact, just the other day, one of our employees made over $300 on this new rate.
But the moment they said they couldn't renegotiate, they signed the same informal agreement your union committee did for the first part of this year, but that you weren't allowed to proceed with, correct?
That is right. I had an unfair labor practice hearing on Tuesday of this week.
So you have 2 complications here. But first of all, I want some more basic facts. When you had the union mill run by you and the non-union mill run by you, correct, Scott?
Correct, yes.
How much did the guys in the union make under the agreement for piecework?
In the union mill?
Yeah.
They made $2.68.
How much a day would they make?
$160, $170.
$160, $170 a day. At that time in the union mill, what was your rate and how much did your man make in the non-union mill?
The rate was $237 per square, and the average was $170 per day.
In other words, you got better productivity from the non-union mill, where they would make $170 a day. He was getting lesser productivity and a higher rate in the union mill at the same money, more or less.
That's correct, Jack. They're both good crews. They're both working with us. They all want to work.
So you're facing 2 difficulties at the moment. One is that the Labour Board in this decision in December said you were operating improperly under the contract. Really, did they not?
Well, they didn't. They said that we were a union mill, that I controlled both, and therefore that I was undermining, get this, undermining the IWA next door. When every mill in the Fraser River was shut down because of these economic times. They chose to bury their head in the sand and not look at it. People that have been in this for generations are going broke, Jack.
There you, that's the point I want to get, though. There you were operating union and non-union, and then you got this, which forced you into a totally unionized position on both mills. Is that right?
That's correct. That's correct.
Now let's go back over the ground again. Did the IWA attempt to organize your non-union mill?
They made several attempts.
And how did they get on with it?
What they did was they were unsuccessful in certifying Scott Cedar Products through the men. So went through other means of Section 37 of the Labor Code, which gives them, on their case, what it's saying is that Green River Log Sales and Scott Cedar Products are the same thing.
Well, are they the same thing?
Of course not. They're separate entities.
Were they not on a common piece of property?
No. They're separate pieces of property. Even in the original application to the IWA made to the Labor Relations Board, they conceded that fact, that they were on separate pieces of ground.
They did?
That's right, yes.
But the Labor Board steps in under the Section 37 application of the IWA and says, you, Clarke, like it or lump it, I've got to put your non-union men into the union and pay full union rates.
Exactly.
But there's a very important point here. Is there a standard rate throughout the shingle mill industry for them?
No. Every mill in the Fraser River is different. There isn't one rate that's the same between mills. It's been in the past a rate negotiated between the individual mill and the local.
With a minimum standby daily rate?
Of approximately right now it's about $115 a day.
So the minimum standard, approximately 115. You're paying 160 to 170, and now you were paying that in both mills when you were operating until last Wednesday.
Exactly.
Could you have kept operating if it had not been for this latest action by the IWA about unfair labor practices?
You betcha. We have one of the most efficient mills, not only in the Fraser Valley, but in the world. The mills along the Fraser River are the best. There's none any better.
And you're telling me that you could even have lived with the compulsory unionization of your son, the plant that son runs, right? Could you have?
At that rate, yes.
At that rate?
Yeah.
If you'd got the $160, $170 a day rate, you could have kept both mills open.
That's
definitely.
Correct.
But now that you're accused of unfair labor practices?
Well, the penalties would be so severe that we had to shut down.
Penalties from whom?
Well, enforced by our Labor Relations Board, I suppose, or the courts. Well, it would be the Labor Relations Board. It was indicated to us at a meeting that we had on Tuesday, it was an informal hearing, that if we carried under the agreements between our crews, which is outside the contract, and I'm the first to admit that, but we've had verbal sanctions from the IWA that this was okay with them. But we couldn't sign the paper because the boys in town would get their throats.
Got me beat, I'll tell you. I understand it, but you got me beat. Doesn't make any sense.
It doesn't make any sense at all.
After the break. These are the Clarkes. And this is Fred Clarke, the owner of Green River Shingle Mill, and his son Scott, who runs the other one, Scott Cedar Products, in which the old man is a partner. Is that right?
That's right.
And then you had Stone Age shingle mills too.
I don't. My other son owns
Your other son owns that. Is that a union plant?
Yes, it is.
And you've closed it down as well?
Yes.
Why have you closed it? Did you have no markets for them? Because they weren't involved in this trouble.
They're involved in this trouble along with a number of other mills in the Fraser River. This cease and desist order that was filed by the IWA on December the 20th, I think it was in January.
The above-mentioned companies have taken it upon themselves to intimidate their employees into accepting rates substantially below the IWA fair negotiated rates as a condition of employment. Have you intimidated your employees, Scott?
No, sir, I have not.
Have you intimidated your employees?
Quite the opposite. My employees came to me and says, Mr. Clarke, we'd like to get back to work here. We'll take a rate revision, on the piecework only. No hourly wages were affected. They went from $303, which is the contract rate in the 1982 contract at my particular mill, and they agreed to go down to $2.68 a square. Now, if that's intimidation,
But they were working. How much did your guys make a month in the non-union mill?
Approximately $170 per day, so they usually work 21 days a month. You're probably looking at about...
$7,500 a month?
About that, yes, that's correct.
Is there any answer for you at all?
well, get Munro to quit burying his head and get out here and see what the hell's happening in this industry.
Have any of the big shots from the IWA regional office been out to see you?
No.
The point that I'm going to make with Munro, is Jack there? Jack?
Yeah.
Come on, I'm glad you've taken this call because it's very difficult to understand what's happening at Scott Cedar and at the Green River Cedar. Mr. Scott here says there was no intimidation of any employees, that they were operating under a previously negotiated shingle workers rate, which was approved by the union. And
yeah, we understand it, Jack. And Bob Blanchard is my first vice president, and he was out last fall, last summer, last spring, had several meetings trying to reach an agreement with them. And I heard the earlier part with these characters, and you know, they're leaving out some things. He said they were separate entities, but they use the same log deck. They put the better wood into the non-union mill and all of this nonsense. The fact of what happened at the Labor Relations Board on Tuesday was the industry.
Let's take that.
The industry told these guys that they had to pay the rates in the collective agreement. The reason it got all mixed up is Peter King and some of these guys were at mills in town that are paying the union rate, told them that if they didn't agree to cut their rates, they would shut them down and run non-union mills.
All right, now just hold it a second. These guys, 150 of them in the 3 mills, were making $160 to $170 a day on the informally negotiated rate of $2.60 odd an hour, right?
Right, and people who were on the union rate were making well over $200.
Yeah, but the hourly rate was not affected by this informal agreement. Do you concede that the local agreed to the informal agreement up till the end of the year?
Jack, this is Bob Blanchard, Jack.
Well, I've seen the document signed by the IWA people out at the plant agreeing.
Jack?
Yeah.
It's Bob Blanchard.
Yes, Bob.
I'm the officer that has had numerous meetings between the shingle industry and FIR and ourselves about the problems that are facing the shingle industry today. And what has been said so far isn't entirely factual.
Well, what's wrong with $170 a day?
There's nothing wrong with $170 a day if you're talking just money, Jack. There is a number of union operations that are working today at the negotiated rate of pay.
Well, first of all, Mr. Clarke tells me here that in almost every shingle mill that it's a different negotiated rate.
Jack, there's a standard negotiated in industry negotiations. There is variances to that depending on the muscle of the crew that have got a little bit more or a little bit less. But the standard increase is negotiated at the bargaining table in broad negotiations, and it's a standard. It's a minimum standard that's set, and must be met by all the shingle companies.
Bob, let's look at this in a practical manner, and I'm not arguing on behalf of Clarke. He can do his own arguing. Here are 150 well-paid jobs which have been pushed down the tube by your cease and desist order and intimidation, and it would seem there wasn't any intimidation of the crew.
Jack, there is no intimidation by the part of the union. We were intimidated by the workers in shingle mill operations in the New Westminster, Vancouver area.
Oh, it was the workers. It was the
working for the union rates and have been threatened to be shut down because they're non-competitive with those mills that are working for non-union, lesser rates than the union rates. What was going to happen here is we were going to have picket lines put up by our union members working in shingle industries at the current rates of pay because we were allowing shingle mills to operate at substandard rates. So all we would have done is we were going to have unemployment somewhere along the line, whether it's our shingle operators or shingle members that are working at the current rates or the ones that are working for substandard.
Okay, hold it a second. You're telling me that you, the regional people, were intimidated by threats from IWA members and other mills?
That's correct.
Right, and you're not suggesting, are you, that Clarke intimidated his employees?
I certainly am.
Okay, hold it. Now, Mr. Clarke, respond to some of this. He says that you were undercutting other mills on the Fraser Valley and New Westminster and up the valley by your techniques. Is that true or false?
Completely false, Jack. Over the years, and I think Mr. Blanchard has to agree with this, that there's been a sort of a hands-off policy when an individual mill comes to revise piecework rates. Always has been in the industry. I can think of numerous wildcats that have happened in this industry throughout the years. Well, several. And when the market is going up, the market has been going up for the last few years, and the workers say, well, I think we need a bigger share of the pie. Now, this was fine with the regional council. Let's go out and get that bigger piece of the pie. Now, what the unions would do is they would picket them off, and they would, and finally bring the operator to his knees. And he would succumb to whatever the adjustment was in the piecework rate. Now, those are back in the good times, in the 60s and 70s. Well, now we're in probably the worst economic chaos that this country's seen in 50 years.
How many jobs can you supply today if the IWA backs off this cease and desist? How many jobs?
160.
Would you open the plant now?
Right now.
And these guys would make $3,500 a month.
That is, Peter King has been to his mills in town and said that if you don't agree to cut your rates, we're going to shut you down and run the mills in the valley.
What do you say to that?
What do I say to that?
It's
Tough.
FIR
But I'll tell you one other thing I say to that. Before, they've always had a hands-off policy to renegotiate the piecework if in fact the crew itself agreed to it.
Jack, could I put a question to the...
Oh, now let me ask you that question. Have you had a hands-off policy with shingle operations where the crew have renegotiated above the minimum standby rate according to the market? Have you?
Yes.
Yes, you have. Why don't you let them do it now?
Because he's afraid we're going to undermine the union. Can you imagine anything so ridiculous?
Right, Jack, we are not trying to undermine the company, and we're not afraid of them undermining us. We have a number of operations on the lower mainland that are shingle. We have a number of them, Canadian Forest Products, a Metro Bestwoods operation, and Wannock Lumber in the Haney local that have been paying the negotiated 82 rates for... since they were due to come into effect. Those operators have told their employees that they will have to shut down because they're non-competitive with the operations that Mr. Clarke represents because they're working for lesser rates of pay.
Okay, what's your answer?
And the employees in those operations who are receiving the 82 rates of pay have come to the union and said, what the hell are you guys doing? You negotiated in negotiation rates for us, and you're allowing mills to operate at lesser rates of pay, and we are being threatened by our employers now that we will have to shut down because we're non-competitive.
You've told me that 10 times, Bob. The fact of the matter is that you agree that it's a variegated shingle rate negotiated at plant level, and they can supply 150 jobs tomorrow, and you won't let them.
And we'll lose 150 in New Westminster and Vancouver if we do.
The hell he will. How the hell are you going to lose that? You know what happens, Jack? I'll tell you what happens.
Okay, let him speak.
Peter King has threatened to shut down his operations. He has... Wannock is in the position that they're not going to have to because they can't compete.
Okay. Just leave it at that. We're getting confused. You say that nobody will close down if you open up. Is that right?
Of course not. Not the ones that are operating. The ones he's talking about in the New Westminster...
I would suggest that you talk to Mr. King, Mr. Webster.
Who's Mr. King?
He is the owner of Bestwood Shingle Industries and has talked to his crew and had his crew ready to come down and picket out the regional office, the Haney office, and the mills that were operating at lesser rates of pay if the union didn't do something about getting the rates back to where they belong.
Bob, you've told me that 10 times.
We sat in a meeting at the Labor Relations Board the other day, and they couldn't get a cord. FIR couldn't get a cord from any of the operators in that room. You put 7 of them in a room together and you get 7 different opinions.
Okay. I've established something this morning.
And
what
FIR,
I've
Jack, has,
no, but what I've
has told these
established...
characters to pay the rates.
Has FIR told you, did they tell you not to negotiate rates with your crews?
They said we could negotiate rates with the crew, but they wouldn't sanction it until the local union did.
You had an okay from the local union at one time.
Verbal okay.
From whom?
From Mr. David Tones.
David Tones
denies the verbal okay.
Well, okay.
Then ask him to phone Tom Getzey at FIR.
Let me just sum this up in one word. The IWA is determined that you have, although they don't push it, that you have intimidated your crew, despite the fact that you had agreement. They will... Jack, you have accepted the unionization of both plants, haven't you?
Well, that's the law.
He's accepted the unionization, and 150 jobs are down the tube, okay? Right? Are you there?
Who are you talking to?
You.
We don't agree that there's 150 jobs. It could be 150 jobs in Haney versus 200 jobs in New Westminster, Vancouver.
Okay, Jack Munro, Bob Blanchard, we'll have you again in detail one of these days, but it's a messy situation and you have a lot of unhappy union members up in Mission.
Well, the guys that are with you are the people that are causing the mess, Jack.
That's not true.
Come off.
Come
It's
on
gotta
back
be
to
50-50.
tables, Jack. Quit burying your head in the sand.
Why doesn't Munro go out and see you?
It can't be cleared up in a
Look
half
at Jack,
an hour show.
I'll tell you
There's
how
a
versed
great
you are
deal
on...
of intrigue that's in all of this, and it should be explained a hell of a lot better than it is being right now.
Quality of wood, Jack, is a major thing in how much money you make. We got people that make $300 a day out there. And these guys put good wood into non-union mills and give our guys the junk. And
Hold on a second. Hold on a second. I'll be back after the break. I'm running out. Munro says, and I've only got 2 minutes, that you give your best logs to the non-union mill for the shakes and shingles. True or false?
False.
Do you have separate log booms and separate decks?
Definitely.
Jack, why don't you go out and look at this operation?
Well, I've had my first vice president on this thing for the last 8 months or some damn thing like it. They've negotiated with FIR. We've tried to negotiate with these characters, and...
Never. Hey,
see, what sticks
hey, Jack, I'll meet you tomorrow and negotiate with you. Let me tell you the problems we have in this industry. You cite a few mills. Cite the ones that have gone bankrupt or have been shut down for the last year and a half. These are families that have been in the wood business for generations.
Well, how many people do you think we've had lose their homes, all the rest of it, because of the
Well, look
softness
at
in the market?
what's happening, Jack, is what you...
in the market.
What?
You're jacking us around, that's what's wrong.
We're jacking you around. Like nothing we're jacking you around. In the good times, we renegotiated the contracts. You had wildcats all over. In the bad times, all we're asking you to come back to the table, give us some of it back. We're not asking it forever, too. If the market starts coming back, we'll gradually give you back.
Do you deny that Peter King did not come into town and say, if you guys don't cut your rates, then you're being shut down and we're going to run in the valley?
Peter King said what?
To his Bestwood operations in New Westminster, that if they didn't cut their rates, he was going to shut them down and run in the valley.
This, I can't speak, but I don't know what Peter King says. I know that he's upset, but he wasn't upset when you guys come out in 3 or 4 years ago and wildcatted me and got an extra 2 bits a square or whatever it was.
Okay,
he
Jack.
sat there and ran his operation. I'm asking for some of it back, that's all.
Jack, well...
And my crew's willing to give it to me, Jack. They negotiated a contract with me. That's all they want is your sanction so they can get back to work and feed their families.
Yeah.
Okay, Jack.
Okay, see
Much
ya.
obliged. This is the tip of a very big iceberg, and you have some sympathy with Munro is that his position is he ain't going to give. But it would seem that you have a special
Right,
situation...
he's done that. What's he doing to do? Bankrupt everybody in the industry? Is that going to make him happy?
My thanks to the Clarks. Much obliged. Now we'll calm down and talk about minor murders, guerrilla warfare, and revolutions in South America, or something a little more peaceful. With Mr. Dachi of the United States Information Agency after the break. Stephen Dachi is the director of the Information Agency for the United States for Latin America and the Caribbean. I do apologize for the kind of noisiness of the show up to now, Mr. Dachi, but I do like occasionally to get involved in something a little beyond our own doorstep. What I know about Central America is put in the back of a dime, but I do know that the United States seems to support every killer, murdering, guerrilla government in South America. I'm being extravagant. But Salvador, Guatemala, Nicaragua, can your country be accused of both feet in supplying arms and ammunition to every tin pot potential Nazi dictator in Central America?
No, not really. In El Salvador, for example, the government that we support is a government which last March held the most honest elections that they've ever been held in El Salvador, with the largest turnout, over 1 million people they've ever had there. That government is taking over in a war in which they're threatened by guerrillas. They are trying to move forward on land reform. They're preparing the presidential elections. And they're trying to curb lawlessness and violation of human rights, which have gone on there forever. And it's tough going, but they're making some progress.
But is the government side, with the assistance perhaps of the CIA and U.S. arms, not really being absolutely foul to the guerrillas who are being equally foul to the government?
Well, the guerrillas are out there to take over. They're the ones that are doing the civil war, right? The government is trying to defend the population and trying to have enough peace and stability to get the farmers back to work, get the crops to market, and get some elections held. A lot of people are getting killed, obviously, from many different sources, but it's not the CIA that's doing anything. And as a matter of fact, of the aid that we give to El Salvador, 80% of it is economic aid. We have 55 U.S. military trainers there and $200 million worth of economic aid. You know, the Cubans can have 30,000 troops running around Angola and nobody thinks anything of that. We have 55 people there working with a legally elected government to help their troops not only do away with the guerrillas, but to work in a more law-abiding manner and respect for human life. And we're the bad guys. We're not the bad guys. We're the good guys.
You're the good guys supporting the bad guys. In other words, what I'm saying to you is one side as bad as the other in Guatemala. What is the political complexion of the rebels, the guerrillas, or whatever you call them?
The guerrillas are basically Marxist, Leninist, communist guerrillas that are trying to take over and bring the same kind of government they brought in Poland and Cuba and Cambodia and Laos. And not only the United States, but the people there don't want any part of it.
And the mission of the United States in Central America and the Caribbean is to try and make quite sure that no Marxist, Leninist, communist governments take over under the Munro Doctrine umbrella. Is that right?
Well, if you talk to thousands of people in the middle class in Guatemala and El Salvador, where they have a lot more than people think, they would tell you that they can't wait for us to be more forceful in supporting them and doing away with this threat, because they don't want to lose the economic gains they've made in the last few years. And if the peasants that we talk about so much were sympathetic with the guerrillas in El Salvador, they would have backed them a long time ago and there would have been a popular uprising and this would have been over. But they don't. They want an end to the war. They went out and voted in an election where there was gunfire all over the place, and they risked their lives to go out and vote because they want an end to the violence.
A quick switch to Cuba. Is Cuba now outside the sphere of U.S. influence for the foreseeable future? In other words, you have the... How would you describe Castro's regime at the moment?
Well, Castro has a communist regime, which he has runs a totalitarian government, is an ally of the Soviet Union, and at the moment we don't have anything to talk with him about.
Is there no prospect of normalizing relations with Cuba? Canada has normal relations, more or less, with Cuba, doesn't it?
Yes, I understand.
Yes, I understand. Is there no prospect ever, as long as Castro is there, of bringing them back into a trading partner with the United States?
Well, as long as Castro is basically supporting the kind of guerrilla uprisings in Central America that we oppose, and is involved in military adventures in Africa, we're not interested in trading with him.
Mm-hmm. Now, what about the other ones? The CIA director, William Casey, admitted the other day that up to 50 CIA agents have operated in Nicaragua. What would they be doing there?
Well, I never heard him admit that, and I'm sure that there are not 50 CIA agents in Nicaragua. And if there were, he wouldn't admit it.
Fair enough. More with Stephen Dachi after the break. My apologies again to Mr. Dachi while I deal with some very pressing business which involves a number of people charged in connection with sabotage and terrorist activities, some of them in British Columbia. On the telephone is Alyn Edwards of the BCTV News Hour, speaking from the police station. What's the score, Alyn?
Well, we've had 5 members of what police describe as an extremist group appear in court this morning, and they're charged with a variety of offenses relating to the May 31st bombing at the Dunsmuir Power Station on Vancouver Island near Qualicum Beach, $4.5 million damage, the fire bombings at 3 red-hot video outlets, and I'm told that some of the 5 members of this extremist group will be charged with the bombing of the Lytton Systems plant in Toronto. I believe the damage figure there was $5 million, plus a number of weapons offenses, possession of dynamite, that kind of thing. There are about 12 charges in all. There are 2 women and 3 men, all in their 20s. They've appeared in court, and they've been remanded until next Wednesday.
That's a major breakthrough then in all these sabotage explosions at Dunsmuir. I believe the Cheekeye Dunsmuir power line, the Canadian Forces base at Cold Lake, Alberta.
There was a conspiracy to sabotage the Canadian Armed Forces base at Cold Lake, Alberta, and they're charged with that. And there's also a charge relating to conspiring to rob a Brinks guard in New Westminster. It appears that this group had planned to finance their operations with the Brinks robbery that was going to happen very quickly, and they were brought down by the police because police feared this robbery was going to take place imminently.
Okay, 5 people, all in their 20s, 2 men and 3 women charged. Full details on the noon news and on the 6 o'clock news hour tonight. Okay, Alyn?
Yes, that's right.
Thanks very much indeed.
Thank you.
Bye. Quite funny, you know, just all we can do really is gossip now. Isn't it incredible, in a quiet little place in the west coast of Canada, we've had major sabotage, and the one in Lytton Industries in Toronto, of course, was an attack on the brain of the cruise missile. Quite incredible. Now let's get back to South America. Are you so deeply involved in Central America just now that there could be a possibility of another kind of Vietnam operation?
No, that's out of the question. For one thing, President Reagan has said every time the opportunity came up that not only have we no intention of sending U.S. military there, but it's not necessary. In fact, in El Salvador, things are going very well. They've had their elections. They're getting ready for the presidential elections. The violence is down. Not as far as we'd like, but it's down, and things are going well. In Guatemala, the government there has also managed to contain the guerrilla threat somewhat more than in the past. And there's no chance at all that we'll have to intervene.
So you say Salvador is quietening down, an attempt at democracy. Guatemala is quietening down, an attempt at democracy. Nicaragua?
Well, Nicaragua, the other guys have hold of that country, and they're not quieting it down at all. I mean, they're giving the church a hard time. They're putting businessmen in jail. They're closing down the one newspaper half the time. They have it censored. They put radios out of business when they say something they're not supposed to. And compared to the 50 military advisors we have in El Salvador, they got thousands of Cubans running around there telling them what to do.
And you've got there are still 30,000 Cuban troops in Angola?
Yes, sir. That's my understanding.
And the Cuban situation fascinates me most of all, in that there is no prospect of, to use one of your fancy words, a rapprochement with Castro. How old is he now?
I don't know. He's still a young man. His beard is getting long, but so is his speeches. But he might be around a long time.
Was it ever established that there might have been an attempt guided from the United States to knock him off?
Well, that's what he said in the past, but there's certainly nothing like that going on these days.
Now, you are the prime movers, of course, in the Organization of American States, are you not? The OAS. I can't even remember if Canada has ever joined it or not. I don't think Trudeau wants to, but I don't remember if he ever did.
No, I don't believe so.
Should we be members of the Organization of American States?
Well, it'd be nice from our standpoint. Anyone in this hemisphere who wants to become interested and participate in its affairs, I think would be very nice. But Canada, I'm sure, has its own reasons for staying in an observer status. I don't know what they are.
What about the broad situation in South America? Brazil, that's a right-wing government.
Well, it's a government that is rapidly completing the transition to democracy. It's a military government. It's certainly not a right-wing government.
How about Chile? That was the favorite one on which the states used to get hammered all the time for sabotaging. It was Allende.
Yes, well, they're no choir boys, but the place is peaceful right now in any event.
Has Reagan's becoming president, that changed radically the policy in the Central American republics for the United States, did it not?
Well, I would say that our policy today is almost the same as it was during the period of Jimmy Carter. The job I have now is the same job I had for the last 2 years of the Carter administration, and the policy then as now was the same, and that is to support a movement toward democracy, to avoid going from a traditional military dictatorships like we've had so many in Latin America to a totalitarian communist kind of dictatorship that lasts forever, to have land reform, to make the place more law-abiding, to respect human rights. That's the same policy we had before. It's the same policy we have now.
And you're only really losing in two places, Nicaragua and Cuba.
Yes, and I think that in Nicaragua we see that there's still a chance for a pluralistic democratic government if they would only listen to
My thanks to Stephen Dachi, the Director of U.S. Information for Central America and the Caribbean. Sorry we didn't have more time. You will forgive me. After the break. Weiler, the man who made the Labour Board and the Labour Code of British Columbia. Axworthy, and later in the program, Paul Weiler, Monday at 9 a.m. precisely. How many jobs will be created?
Well, I think construction jobs, you're looking at 1,500 to 2,000 construction jobs when we get up.
Tragedy in the shape of mass murder in Ranch Park, Coquitlam. Inside the house were the bodies of 3 men and 3 women dead by gunshot wounds.
I think that the government has got to drop the charges. They've got to return the vehicles to the Indian people. If they owe an apology to those people for the way that they were handled. And I think finally Mr. Shinners should retire for his actions.
And whether you like it or not, I shall deal with it. I shall also deal on separate occasions with the grassroots problems and the economy. And we in BCTV make no apologies for our assessment or for my assessment of their assessment of prostitution.